Trump has taken the position that he thinks the hysteria is overblown, so the media automatically assumes the opposing narrative. If Trump had instead hyped the threat of coronavirus, the media would be calling him hysterical and accusing him of planning to cancel the election. Whatever Trump does, they advocate the opposite. Because Orange Man bad.
Orange Man bad.
Orange Man bad.
Orange Man.
Orange Man.
I want to tell you two stories. Story number one. This is Rick Scott. Rick Scott defrauded the federal government of $1.7 billion in Medicare fraud. Used that money to self-fund a campaign to be governor of Florida. Used his power as governor to deny millions of people access to Medicaid on the basis that it would waste tax dollars. Set up a kangaroo court in which he personally would decide which criminals would be allowed to get their vote back, like it's the kangaroo court from Dark Knight Rises.
There's absolutely no standards. So we can make any decisions we want.
Use that voter suppression power and money to help his run for Senate, and when that proved insufficient to get him elected, he used his power as governor to threaten local officials to declare him the winner, or else he would investigate them.
I will not sit idly by while unethical liberals try to steal this election from the great people of Florida.
Story number two. There are people who will get mad at you if you don't use non-binary pronouns. One of these stories is a sign that we're living in an increasingly authoritarian dystopia. And one of these stories are totally harmless. For most Americans, it's impossible to know which is which. But the consensus on YouTube is the latter. And why wouldn't it be? The median YouTube commenter is white, middle class, a guy. The harm done by one is equally theoretical as harm done by another. They're fine either way. And, well, that's true of most political issues these days. It's why real change hasn't really happened for 50 years. No one can be bothered to try and understand the link between policy and their own personal quality of life. The systems involved are just too complicated. And trying to convince someone of the relationship between those two is... you might as well be trying to convince them of your new brand of astrology. But then something comes along where the link is too direct to ignore.
Latest facts at this hour, more than 700,000 coronavirus cases confirmed across this country. 37,310 people have died. And one of the day's other big headlines, in fact, just moments ago, as you were hearing, the governor of New York announcing 540 people died in the state yesterday.
Elect a fuck up president. Get a fucked up disaster response. And not some small localized disaster out in a scary foreign third world country like Puerto Rico. It's your life, your personal disaster. It's inescapable. People might actually reckon with the idea that the Orange Man is, in fact, bad. Or so I thought.
According to two new polls, the majority of Americans now approve of the president's job in handling the coronavirus pandemic.
And this is kind of important because you see this quite a bit historically. It's a good indicator. 60% of Americans actually approve of his response to coronavirus.
More surprisingly, progressives were angry to find out it was Democratic leadership opposing this stimulus package plan, because apparently Trump, Republicans, and the leftist progressives are all in favor of giving a stimulus check to American citizens. Democrats, actually. But the reason these polls have flipped in Trump's favor, shockingly, is because more Democratic voters are starting to recognize it.
Let's start from the beginning. It's been 20 years since last January, so you could probably use a refresher.
I've held my opinion on it for a very long time, but when you see the articles of impeachment that came out, I don't think it was within Dr. King's vision to have Americans drag through a process where the president is not going to be removed from office.
These are the 5 phases of coronavirus grief, if you're a right-wing propagandist. Phase 1. It'll be fine. 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 January 21st. 1,000 people have tested positive for corona in China. The first case has been discovered in the US. You and everyone else are instead distracted by the Democratic primary. And the president and his team is focused primarily on the impeachment. The president waits 8 days before assembling a coronavirus panel. Trump otherwise shows no interest. When the task force announces the travel restrictions on China, he's nowhere to be seen.
We have very few people with it, and the people that have it are, in all cases, I have not heard anything other. Maybe there's something new, because for 2 days I haven't been seeing too much of that news, of very much news, because it's been very all-encompassing.
February 26. Community spread has been discovered in the United States. The virus is now loose and growing exponentially. But more importantly,
the Dow closed down nearly 1,000 points again, wiping out most of yesterday's gains. More evidence that Wall Street and the economy at large remains on edge.
Now Trump can't ignore it, but he also doesn't want to not ignore it. So he holds a rally in Charlotte, North Carolina, against the wishes of his task force to reassure people. Charlotte would later become the epicenter of the disease in North Carolina. He also tells people it's only as bad as the flu. It is, in fact, known to be 20 or 30 times deadlier than the flu at this point. While it's impossible to know if his lack of leadership was responsible, the CDC is also in the middle of botching the creation of its test kits. Phase 2. Blaming the media for taking it too seriously. There's no explanation here. I'm just going to do a montage while the Dark Seed Carnival music plays.
The woke progressives in media have the ability, with their megaphone, to directly affect economic markets. And so they come out here and they talk, they create this hysteria without any context. They want this to happen so that then they can pin the virus and the negative economic impact on President Donald Trump.
0 people in the United States of America have died from the coronavirus. 0.
We have 6 deaths from the coronavirus, 18,000 deaths from the flu.
9 people have died. That's tragic, but it's teeny.
22 people have been killed. Those numbers pale in comparison to the number of flu cases over this flu season.
An estimated 60,000 Americans will die from the coronavirus. According to the CDC, in 2018, 61,000 Americans died of the annual flu.
All of this panic is just not warranted. I'm telling you, when I've told you that this virus is the common cold, when I said that, it was based on the number of cases. It's also based on the kind of virus this is. Why do you think this is COVID-19? This is the 19th coronavirus. They're not uncommon.
Because Italy is supposedly the hot zone in the world for this right now. And as of when I went to bed last night, updated numbers, 0.0000, that's 4 zeros. 0.00006157 of its population had perished as a result of this pandemic. The whole country's on lockdown. It doesn't make any sense.
And call me crazy, but I am far more concerned with stepping on a used heroin needle than I am getting the coronavirus, but maybe that's just me.
Wall Street hit from almost every direction today. The national left-wing media playing up fears of the coronavirus that has now infected at least 113,000 people.
You cannot shame me on that level. I'm unshameable. I am immune to demagoguery.
Phase 3. Actually, this proves we were right all along. The right loves narratives about how they were totally prevented from acting effectively by political correctness. The problem is, no one politically correct has the power to stop them from doing anything. So they're gonna have to stretch a bit.
So you know how progressive media outlets have been socially engineering everyone to start eating bugs?
Excuse me? No? What?
Turns out bat soup is a delicacy in China, and that the animal market in Wuhan, which was the source of the coronavirus outbreak, sold bats. Here's the point. It doesn't matter if it makes you feel cultured, open-minded, or well-travelled. Eating bats is fucking gross. I mean, they don't even scrape the meat off. They just dump a bat corpse in the middle of a bowl.
Fact check. It came from pangolins, not bats. The pangolins got it from the bats. Blame them. Little gross bastards. Fucking Pokemon is reimagined by David Cronenberg. Fuck pangolins. Also, they don't eat bat in China. These videos are all like travel vloggers who went to Polynesia for a vacation and filmed themselves trying the bat for views. They are also clearly a little grossed out. You'd think Paul would have more empathy for people demeaning themselves for likes and subscribes. Also, like, what's the argument here? We should have put sanctions on China until they stopped eating gross food? Wait, wasn't this about bugs?
The left has routinely railed on Trump over his stance on China. They said the tariffs were a bad idea, and that the trade war was going to hurt everybody. But what's the alternative?
Think of how much less prepared we'd be if aluminum was cheaper.
Now look what's happened. Global pandemic, panic buying across the world, entire countries quarantined. Thanks, open borders.
They wanted to leave the European Union. They wanted to control their trade and control their borders. And we can see now why that was 100% correct.
Oh, but what about border controls? They all talked about border controls, and now we need border controls. Here's the thing about viruses. They don't give a shit about how long you stay or what your purpose in a country is. The incubation period is, after all, only about a week. So the millions of tourists and business travelers who come into a country have a way bigger effect on virus spread than some poor bastard from Algeria looking for a work visa. Now, have any of the anti-immigration lunatics who have come to rule over us in the last 4 years mentioned too many tourists or too many businesses investing in our country? Or did they save all that vitriol for poor people looking for work? Because if the answer is the latter, then it's not really relevant to the virus, is it, Tim?
Look, I know a lot of people don't want to hear what I have to say because they just want to hate the president no matter what.
And then, of course, there's the president.
Hey, look, I was called xenophobic by Sleepy Joe Biden. I was called a racist by Democrats, a racist. I was a racist because I decided that I didn't want to have people that could hurt our country come in.
The Trump campaign has invested a lot in this clip of Biden.
This is no time for Donald Trump's record of hysterical xenophobia.
In context, he doesn't actually mention the China travel ban. You see, the other thing about Azar's announcement of the China travel restrictions is that they happened the same day that Trump expanded the Muslim travel ban. And as pointed out, no one, including the president, was paying attention to this decision. That's why he's not here at this press conference. Let's talk about neoliberalism. I know you're thinking, oh man, a left-wing YouTuber wants to talk about neoliberalism. What a surprise. No. I'm not talking modern, namby-pamby, anything I don't like is neoliberalism. I'm talking about the real shit. The hardcore, mid-90s, the Heckscher Olin model proves Pakistani sweatshops are good neoliberalism. I'm talking this. This is Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman was probably the most successful popularizer of right-wing economic ideas in the 20th century. In a big sense, he's the architect of the whole economic paradigm we live in. I mean, he's much more influential than the thinkers who are usually associated with libertarianism. Guys like Hayek or von Mises or Ayn Rand. Yet he gets way less appreciation on the internet. Maybe it's because he's too successful. He is, after all, the man who actually put libertarian ideas into practice, and as we all know about libertarianism, it's a lot prettier in theory than in practice. And in this book, he argues that not only is a free market good in itself, but it's necessary to even have a democracy in the first place. More infamously, he used this argument to defend his support for the Pinochet regime in Chile, defending himself by arguing that by convincing a dictator to adopt free market policies, he was setting the stage for a return to democracy. And when Chile did become a democracy in 1990, he took credit. It was this environment, in which his ideas were dominant, that the West decided to open up to China, without any regards for its human or political rights record. And while that decision was very much bipartisan, in the Congress it always had far more support from Republicans than Democrats. And the support it got from Democrats were moderates. Left-wing Democrats from the beginning knew this was a bad idea.
And this deal is a bad deal for the American economy. They told us 11 years ago when we started this fight that if we kowtow to every wish of the Chinese regime following Tiananmen Square, that our trade advantage would increase.
The People's Republic of China continues to sell arms to authoritarian regimes. The People's Republic of China has been caught spying on the United States.
I want to congratulate the veterans organizations for standing up in strong opposition to PNTR. And in doing so, they are joining virtually every labor organization in this country, every environmental organization in this country, many religious organizations such as the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, many human rights organizations. And it seems to me what is very, very unfortunate is that when we have organizations, grassroots organizations, representing tens and tens of millions of Americans, that we have to fight so hard to defeat this terrible piece of legislation, because on the other side, you have big money corporations whose only concern is not human values, is not the betterment of this country or in fact the people of China, but is the almighty bottom line.
Phase 4. Oh Jesus, they're going to make us go to war with China, aren't they?
You got a foreign intelligence operative inside the Senate, inside the House, inside a U.S. corporation, kill him. My God, it's not a big deal. Go grab them out of their house at night and slit their damn throat. What you're supposed to do. Stop playing games here. Kill the Chinese agents now. Let's start there. And all these Democrats will roll over like that as soon as their handler's dead.
Ultimately, I don't think it matters who is to blame, but of course many people say it's China. They knew about the pandemic, they didn't tell anyone. In fact, they weaponized it, spreading disinformation to hurt people. Some have called this an act of war.
When that crisis is upon the world, every intergalactic jerkwad who contributed to that crisis says, hey man, now, you see, is not the time to point fingers. Now we've got to just deal with this. We've got to pull together. We've got to deal with this crisis. And I say no. Now is exactly the time to point fingers. So the elites for the past couple of decades have been telling us that the gravest danger, the gravest conceivable danger that we face as a species is not a totalitarian communist regime in China.
You politicians want to flex your muscles? Well, start working on how you're going to punish, ostracize, alienate, and financially sanction and make China accountable for what they did.
Kill them now. It's very simple. Do it.
I mean, that's the oldest tool in the toolbook, going all the way back to Cleon of Athens. We shouldn't be surprised. No, Trump has only ever complained about the Chinese in economic terms, the debt, the job stealing, but the propaganda ministry figures that's close enough to say Trump had correctly devised that we were under attack. Apparently lax food safety standards and incompetent governance constitutes an attack on the world when a different superpower does it.
Ultimately, I don't think it matters who is to blame, but of course many people say it's China. They knew about the pandemic, they didn't tell anyone. In fact, they weaponized it, spreading disinformation to hurt people. Some have called this an act of war.
Now, routine soft power grabs, routine corporate espionage, and routine military upgrades constitute an existential threat to you, me, mom, and apple pie. And China has obliged. We're currently in a PR race to the bottom that no one on Earth could possibly give a fuck about, outside of the State Department and the People's Foreign Ministry. Will this lead to war with China? No. There's still too much money that would be lost, but keep an ear out from lots of allegedly serious people about decoupling. That's how it's going to start. And just to be clear, if you want to know why no one, including for the most part the government, doesn't make a big stink out of all that corporate espionage, it's because we're doing the same thing to them. Duh. Phase 5. The Counterfactual. As I write, an army of Nurgle worshippers are besieging the bastions of state government, demanding that everything go back to normal. Some using the justification that the virus is a hoax, others using the justification that the virus is only a danger to our more expendable citizens. Nütze Esser, I think is the word in German. Fox News, and so it's safe to say clandestinely the White House, are encouraging and in some cases organizing these protests. But why? I mean, if we do open up too early, more people will die and everything will get worse, and they'll take the blame. But that's just the counterfactual. The point of this pressure campaign isn't to work and force governors to open up. In fact, they're counting on it not working. Because as long as no one blinks, the counterfactual of what would happen if we did open up remains firmly in the realm of the imaginary, which means people can fill it with whatever utopian fantasy scenario they like. And people will blame governors instead of Trump for not being able to fulfill that scenario. You will of course notice they're only encouraging these protests in swing states. Will this work? No. The link between a bad economy and bad electoral outcomes are supposed to be Pavlovian, not rational. But imagine if a president had enough power that it could work. That would mean we've hit a technological epoch in which propaganda can successfully override Pavlovian experience. How would democracy even work in that case? It couldn't. We would be trapped between choosing between a bunch of different authoritarian systems. Fortunately, that definitely isn't going to happen. Most likely won't happen. Probably. Maybe. 50-50. And a special thank you to my patrons: Deanna Banana, Farda Barf Slab, Kimma Berry, Kitten of the Yarn Persuasion, Spoderman, Ted Teddington Tedsville, and The Anno.